What if everything you know is a performance, not a metaphor, not an exaggeration, but a carefully curated illusion, designed not just to entertain you, but to contain you? From the moment we're born, a script is handed to us. We learn the lines without knowing there was ever a choice. We're taught what is good, what is bad, what is normal. We're taught to trust the voice on the screen, the authority behind the podium, the comfort of consensus. And we never question who wrote the script in the first place. But here's the question that should haunt us. If you've only ever seen shadows, could you even recognize the light? Plato asked this over 2,000 years ago in his allegory of the cave. He imagined prisoners, chained from birth, facing a wall. Behind them, a fire. And between the fire and the prisoners, puppeteers casting shadows on the wall. The prisoners believe these shadows are reality, because it's all they've ever known. Now replace the fire with a glowing screen. Replace the shadows with headlines, clickbait, scrolling feeds. Replace the puppeteers with advertisers, influencers, politicians, and algorithms. And ask yourself, are we any different? Jean Baudrillard once said that we now live in a world of simulacra, copies of things that never had an original, a hyper-reality, where the sign becomes more real than the thing it was supposed to represent. We no longer experience reality. We experience its simulation, the performance. You believe in your country, your job, your identity. But are these truths, or are they constructs? Ideas stitched together by stories repeated so often, no one dares to challenge them. And here lies the danger. Because the one who begins to doubt the script is seen not as wise, but as mad. Because madness, in a world of illusions, is sometimes nothing more than refusing to play along. So before we go any further, ask yourself, if you've never seen the real world, how would you know? Once the illusion is questioned, a strange thing happens. Not clarity, not liberation, but resistance. Deep psychological resistance. Because doubt, for the human mind, is dangerous. Not just socially, but biologically. We are wired for stability, pattern, narrative, meaning, and anything that threatens that order is treated as a threat to our very survival. This is where the architecture of belief begins. Not with the truth, but with need. In the 1950s, psychologist Leon Festinger embedded himself in a doomsday cult. The leader had predicted that the world would end on December 21st. When the date came and went, the world remained intact. Logic would suggest the followers would abandon the prophecy. But the opposite happened. They believed more deeply than ever. They told themselves their faith had saved the planet. They needed to believe. Because accepting the truth, that they had been wrong, would have shattered their identity. This phenomenon, Festinger called cognitive dissonance. When reality and belief collide, the mind bends one to protect the other. And 9 times out of 10, it's reality that gets rewritten. But it doesn't end there. In Solomon Ash's now famous conformity experiments, participants were placed in a room with actors pretending to be fellow test subjects. They were shown simple lines and asked which one matched in length. When the actors all gave the wrong answer, most participants followed, even when the truth was obvious. Why? Because the pressure to belong often overpowers the instinct to be right. We would rather be accepted and wrong than isolated and right. Then came Stanley Milgram. His study asked participants to administer what they believed were painful electric shocks to another person. Under the instruction of an authority figure in a lab coat, ordinary people obeyed. They pushed the button, again and again. Even as the screams grew louder. Because the presence of authority, someone who sounds certain, is often all it takes to override morality, logic, even empathy. These experiments reveal something unsettling. That belief is not a function of intellect, it's a function of fear. We believe what protects us. We believe what reassures us. We believe what keeps our world intact, even if it's false. That's why propaganda works. That's why censorship works. That's why entire populations can fall under the spell of illusion without ever realizing they've been hypnotized. Because belief, at its core, is a coping mechanism. It calms the chaos. It simplifies the world. It tells us we're good people, living in a good society, guided by good leaders. And when that story is threatened, we don't seek truth. We double down on the myth. This isn't a failure of intelligence. It's a feature of the human psyche. A necessary adaptation in a world too vast, too complex, too uncertain to fully grasp. But here's the cost. If belief is built to make us feel safe, not to show us what's real, then how much of what we believe is even true? We end with a simple, disquieting truth. Belief is rarely about what is. It's about what we can stand to live with. At the individual level, illusion comforts us. But on the societal scale, illusion controls us. What happens when not just one person, but millions, believe in something that isn't real? Not because they're stupid, but because they've been taught, from every direction, never to question it. This is the architecture of mass illusion. And it doesn't begin with a lie. It begins with repetition. In the early 20th century, a man named Edward Bernays, nephew of Sigmund Freud, pioneered the field of public relations. But Bernays didn't just sell products, he sold ideas. Using psychological insights, he realized that if you could influence the unconscious desires of the masses, you could manufacture consent without force. He called it engineering public opinion. You don't have to convince everyone. You just have to make them believe that everyone else already agrees. Later, Noam Chomsky would expand on this in Manufacturing Consent, explaining how media systems filter and shape what we perceive as truth. Not by telling outright lies, but by selecting which voices get heard, which stories get told, and which narratives get repeated until they become invisible. A silent consensus built not on facts, but on omission and noise. History is full of examples. In 1930s Germany, propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels understood the emotional power of repetition. The Nazi regime used film, music, education, and media to create a worldview so immersive, so consistent, that it rewired reality itself. People weren't brainwashed overnight. They were nudged, day after day, until the unthinkable became normal. During the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union used disinformation campaigns to shape not only public opinion, but cultural memory. A citizen in Moscow and a citizen in New York could look at the same event and see two completely different truths. Each side believed the other was brainwashed, and each was right in part. But this isn't just history. Today, we live in a digital simulation of that same process, only faster, subtler, and more seductive. Modern media doesn't need to lie. It just needs to distract, to divide, to entertain. It fragments reality into echo chambers. Algorithms learn what you like and feed you only that. You begin to mistake your curated feed for a mirror of the world. And because everyone in your digital bubble sees the same thing, it feels like the truth. You think you have choices. But what if your options are just variations of the same script? A red pill or a blue pill, both manufactured in the same factory. This is the brilliance of modern control. It doesn't feel like control. It feels like freedom, like preference, like your own voice. But ask yourself, when was the last time you believed something that wasn't reinforced by your environment? When was the last time a headline challenged your worldview instead of confirming? We live in a Truman Show of our own making, smiling, consuming, agreeing, until one day we bump into the edge of the set and realize it's all been staged. The most terrifying truth is not that we've been lied to, it's that we believed it together. That when everyone accepts the same illusion, it no longer feels like fiction, It becomes reality, because the crowd does not need evidence. We only need each other. And that's when the lie becomes unbreakable. In a world built on illusion, is it sane to see clearly? This is where the journey of doubt reaches its most painful crossroad. Because the moment you begin to see through the veil, you don't feel enlightened. You feel alone, disoriented, adrift in a sea of people who still believe. And here lies the paradox. Society tells us that sanity is clarity, rationality, stability. But what if those qualities only make sense inside the boundaries of a shared delusion? The psychologist R.D. Laing once wrote that insanity is not necessarily a loss of reason, but sometimes a reaction to an unreasonable world. In The Divided Self, he studied individuals diagnosed as mentally ill and found not chaos, but coherence, a logic that made perfect sense once you understood the pain they were responding to. They weren't mad. They were responding to madness. But when the environment itself is the disease, then resistance looks like dysfunction. Withdrawal looks like apathy. Outrage looks like paranoia. The sociologist Erich Fromm, in Escape from Freedom, took it a step further. He argued that modern society, by enforcing conformity, breeds a special kind of psychological deadness, a loss of the true self. We become what others expect. We think the thoughts we're told are appropriate. We feel the feelings we're allowed to express, and we call it mental health. But health, real health, means more than just adaptation. It means wholeness. It means truth. What if sanity, in the deepest sense, is not about fitting in, but about waking up? Because here's the secret. No one tells you. To see clearly in a world gone blind is to suffer. The clearer your vision becomes, the more alienated you feel. You begin to notice how artificial everything is. The polite scripts in conversation, the performative rituals of culture, the endless cycles of work, consumption, distraction. You see the smiling newscaster deliver tragedy like entertainment. You hear the politician repeat a rehearsed line like it's divine revelation. You watch the world pretend, and pretend not to know it's pretending. And you wonder, am I losing my mind? Or am I finally seeing things as they are? It's no coincidence that many of history's greatest thinkers, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, wrestled with despair. Not because they were broken, but because they refused to close their eyes. They stood at the edge of the abyss and looked. They didn't run. In a culture addicted to certainty, to pleasure, to distraction, the one who doubts is seen as dangerous. Not because doubt is destructive, but because it is freeing. Doubt threatens the system. It makes people ask uncomfortable questions. It disrupts the consensus. That's why, throughout history, the truth-teller is often branded a madman. Socrates was executed. Giordano Bruno was burned. Even today, whistleblowers are exiled, ridiculed, erased. So we must ask, is it truly insane to be disturbed by the world as it is? Or is insanity the ability to live comfortably within a lie? And perhaps the greatest irony is this. That is what we call depression, anxiety, existential dread. Might not be signs of a broken mind, but symptoms of a mind refusing to break. Mind still fighting for something real, for meaning that isn't prepackaged, for truth that isn't broadcast, for a connection to life that isn't mediated through screens, slogans, and sales pitches. Maybe it isn't the doubter who is sick. Maybe it's the world that made certainty a drug and illusion a sacrament, and those who suffer because they feel the dissonance. They aren't weak. They are sensitive. They are attuned to what others numb. They are not behind. They are ahead. So let us consider the possibility. That doubt is not the beginning of madness. It is the end of it, because only when you question everything can you begin to build something true. Doubt feels like destruction, like something is unraveling, coming undone. But in many ancient traditions, this unraveling isn't the end. It's the doorway. There's a moment in Zen Buddhism called Kensho. It means seeing into one's true nature, but it doesn't arrive through peace. It arrives through disruption. The master confounds the student. The koan breaks logic. The mind, seeking stability, finally collapses, only to discover in that collapse a deeper clarity. Not a new belief, not a doctrine, but a direct experience of something that was always there, obscured by illusion. Zen doesn't fear doubt. It weaponizes it. It turns the mind inward, not to find answers, but to exhaust the need for them. The philosopher René Descartes did something similar. In a time dominated by rigid dogma, he performed an experiment. Strip away every belief that could be false. Everything taught, everything assumed, everything handed down. What remained? Only one thing. Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. It was the only certainty he could not doubt. Because even the act of doubting proved there was something doing the doubting. Descartes' methodic doubt wasn't skepticism for the sake of negation. It was doubtful in service of finding a bedrock, a foundation untouched by illusion. He wasn't destroying reality. He was trying to uncover it. In the mystic traditions of Christianity, doubt takes yet another form. St. John of the Cross called it the dark night of the soul, a spiritual emptiness, a sense of abandonment, the silence of God. To the surface mind, it feels like despair, but to the mystic, it's a sacred passage, a fire that burns away false faith, beliefs built on comfort, not truth. It's only after this darkness, this stripping away, that the mystic is said to encounter the divine, not as an idea, but as presence, immediate, wordless, unmediated. This isn't just religion. It's a pattern. Across cultures and epochs, the journey toward truth begins not with answers, but with the breaking of false certainty. Doubt is not a weakness. It is initiation, because only when the scaffolding collapses can you see what's been holding you up. Only when the illusion dissolves can you touch what's real. Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, was famous for one thing: asking questions. But he didn't ask to win debates. He asked to expose assumptions. His wisdom, he said, was not that he knew more, but that he knew that he didn't know. In that awareness, he was freer than those who clung to rigid truths. Even in Hindu philosophy, the journey of the self is framed as awakening from Maya, illusion. The ego, the body, the world of appearances, these are not denied, but they're seen as masks. The seeker's task is not to escape reality, but to see through it. The theme echoes again and again. Doubt is the threshold, the uncomfortable, disorienting, terrifying moment when the map no longer matches the terrain. But it is in this moment that something radical becomes possible. Awakening. Not to a new belief system, not to another ideology, but to awareness itself, to a form of seeing unclouded by narrative. This is why so many traditions speak of the witness, the one who observes. Beneath every thought, beneath every belief, there is something silently watching, constant, unchanging. That witness is not interested in opinion. It doesn't need certainty. It doesn't cling. It simply sees. And when you find it, when doubt clears away the noise long enough for silence to be heard, something profound happens. Not ecstasy, not euphoria, but clarity, stillness, a sense that you are no longer trying to grasp reality. You are resting in it. Doubt was not the obstacle. It was a vehicle, because only the mind that dares to let go of the known can touch what has no name. We've come full circle, out of Plato's cave, through the shadowlands of belief, and into the harsh daylight of the present. But this light, instead of revealing truth, blinds us with reflections, simulations, echoes of echoes. We no longer dwell in the world of things. We live inside a hall of mirrors. Jean Baudrillard called it the age of simulacra. Not just false images, but images that replace reality. Simulacra are copies without originals, media that pretend to represent something real, but are in fact the only thing that exists. A commercial doesn't just sell a product, it sells a lifestyle, an emotion, a dream. Eventually, the dream becomes more familiar than reality ever was. We stop asking what's true, and instead ask, what's trending? Welcome to the post-truth era. It's not that the truth has disappeared. It's that we've drowned it beneath so many competing narratives, so many layers of curated meaning, that it can no longer breathe. We scroll, we swipe, we consume. Content, opinions, news, outrage. Every moment is mediated, filtered, branded, and all of it feels urgent, vital, true. But whose truth? In 2016, Oxford dictionaries chose post-truth as their word of the year. It wasn't a prophecy, it was a diagnosis, a shift where emotional appeal outweighed empirical fact, where political narratives didn't have to be accurate, just persuasive. In this world, consensus is manufactured not through debate, but through saturation, repetition, noise, and the machinery behind it, inhuman, algorithmic, invisible. Social media platforms don't care what's true. They care what engages. They reward outrage, tribalism, certainty. The more you react, the more you see. And the more you see, the deeper the tunnel becomes. The walls echo only what you already believe. It's called an echo chamber, but it's more like a feedback loop of identity. You're not just liking ideas. You're curating the self, the digital you, a persona optimized for applause, carefully selected, algorithmically enhanced, and constantly observed. This is surveillance capitalism. Not in the Orwellian sense of booted soldiers watching your every move. It's more insidious, more seductive. You're not being policed, you're being mirrored by algorithms designed to predict your behavior, manipulate your choices, and sell your attention to the highest bidder. You become the product. The illusion of freedom is maintained only because you feel like you're choosing, but the choice was always inside a cage. And now we face a new twist, the age of deep fakes and generative AI, where faces can be forged, voices cloned, and memories rewritten in pixels, where video evidence, once the gold standard of truth, can no longer be trusted, where nothing is necessarily fake, but everything might be. We're not just skeptical of authority, we're skeptical of reality itself. And that paranoia, that creeping sense that we're being lied to, played, manipulated, is not delusion. It's rational, logical, necessary. Because the lie isn't just outside you, it's inside, programmed in, believed unconsciously, repeated daily. Truth is no longer a destination. It's a moving target in a storm of illusion. This is Baudrillard's hyperreality, when the simulation becomes more real than reality. When Disneyland isn't a fantasy escape from the real world, but a model that the real world tries to imitate. The fake becomes the ideal. The symbol devours the thing it once symbolized. We once asked, what is true? Now we ask, what feels true? And feelings, while valid, are easily hijacked. Politics becomes theater, news becomes entertainment, and identity becomes a costume that shifts with the algorithm's logic. This is not dystopia. This is Tuesday. The tragedy is not that people are misled. It's that they're comfortable being misled because the lie flatters them, protects them, gives them purpose. In this world, the truth is not suppressed. It's drowned, diluted, lost in a sea of convincing counterfeits. But here lies a paradox. The more uncertain the world becomes, the more sacred doubt becomes. In a reality where everything can be fabricated, The only path to authenticity is skepticism. Radical doubt is no longer a luxury. It's a survival tool. It's what allows you to pause before you click, to question before you believe, to look beneath the surface and ask, who benefits from this story? Who profits from this outrage? Who wrote this script and why? We are not passive observers. We are actors in the simulation. And unless we become aware of the stage, the costume, the cues, we'll mistake the play for life itself. But there's another way. To become conscious, not just of what's being shown, but how it's being shown. To reclaim your attention. To step out of the echo chamber and hear silence. To feel the weight of the unmediated moment. In a world addicted to illusion, truth isn't what's handed to you. It's what you discover when you begin to doubt everything you were taught to trust. And maybe, just maybe, that's where something real begins. There's a peculiar peace that comes after the storm of doubt. Not the peace of answers, but the calm that settles when you stop demanding them. When you stop clutching at certainty as if it were oxygen. Something begins to loosen, not in the world, but in you. For so long, we were taught to fear uncertainty, to see doubt as weakness, as a flaw in logic, as a threat to the stable, structured life we were told to pursue. But what if the opposite is true? What if the fear of not knowing is the real prison, and doubt is the key? Alan Watts called it the wisdom of insecurity. He saw that life, in its essence, is fluid, changing, impermanent. The harder we try to grasp it, to pin it down with fixed ideas and absolute truths, the more it slips through our fingers. We suffer not because life is uncertain, but because we demand that it shouldn't be. In a world obsessed with conclusions, not knowing becomes a radical act. We were conditioned to believe that knowledge is power. But there's another kind of power, quieter, deeper, the power of humility. Of being able to say, I don't know, and meaning it not as a confession of ignorance, but as a declaration of freedom. Kierkegaard called it the leap. The moment when the rational mind, faced with the absurdity of existence, lets go and leaps into faith. Not blind belief in a doctrine, but faith in the unknown itself. The trust that meaning isn't something you find, but something you create in the face of mystery. To live without certainty is not to drift aimlessly. It is. To sail by stars you may never touch, but still navigate by. This is not nihilism. It's not despair. It's the beginning of something deeper. When you no longer need the world to make perfect sense, you begin to experience it directly. Not through labels, not through ideologies, but through presence, through awareness, through the eyes of someone who has woken from a long, hypnotic dream. We are no longer prisoners demanding proof. We become the wanderer, walking with open hands. There's something beautiful about that image. The doubter not as a cynic, but as a seeker. Not as someone who has lost their way, but as someone finally brave enough to admit they were never certain to begin with. And maybe no one ever was. It takes courage to look at the chaos and not flinch. To admit that your beliefs might have been stories. That your sense of control was mostly an illusion. And still, to keep moving forward, not toward certainty, but toward honesty. That's the difference. The goal is no longer to master reality, but to meet it. To be in conversation with it. To live in the question, instead of rushing toward the answer. There is liberation in that. A spaciousness of mind. A silence that isn't empty, but alive. Because once you stop needing reality to confirm your assumptions, you begin to see it as it is, vast, complex, unknowable. And yet, somehow, intimate. Maybe this is the final turn of the key. Doubt was never the enemy. It was the guide, the guardian at the edge of illusion. The reminder that what we call sanity, truth, or even reality might just be comfortable fictions we inherited. To doubt reality is not to fall into madness. It is to begin remembering that you were asleep. And now, perhaps, You are finally awake.